Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jackie Iverson. I'm the founder of Health Schema, the digital health wallet aimed at bringing personalized medicine as the mainstream practice by uncovering a 360-degree view of your healthcare journey so you can make informed decisions in partnership with your doctors and care providers. Part of the 360 of your healthcare journey, this podcast series feature well-rounded healthcare-related topics that are meant to elevate your whole health. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to Ranger Kielak, who not only is a fantastic agricultural business consultant at Within Range Coaching, he's walked across the United States. Hi, Ranger. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Health Schema Podcast.
Of course, Jackie. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk ag and talk farming and everything. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and actually you're from the Bay Area, right? I used to live there, so I really miss the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually do consulting for agricultural companies throughout the United States, correct?
Yeah, but most of my focus in California, but I am looking to expand a little bit into Illinois of all places. There's a gentleman over there that I'm working with right now to see if we can bring some California pesticide awareness and education programs to the state. So starting to expand out a lot more now. So
great. So do you have to have a special license from state to state to practice there, or is it pretty much across the U.S. is without any special license?
So it's going to be state dependent. So, for example, I can speak very well on the California regulations. For what I do as a agricultural business consultant, I'm mostly focused on pesticide use enforcement regulation, as well as farmers market regulations. So on the pesticide side, there are different licenses in California that you need to have in order to apply, own a business, or advise on pesticides. Since I'm not necessarily doing that, and I'm more so helping farmers and growers understand regulations, there's not a specific license that I need. It's just the experience and being able to break down those very heady concepts from the laws and regs into a way that folks can understand across the board. So very long way of saying, for what I do specifically, there's no specific license, but I do have various certifications to do things like pesticide handler training, as well as applications.
Great. And actually, so regulations, do they change from state to state?
Yes. So the way that it kind of works is on the EPA side, on the federal level, there's something called FIFRA, FIFRA, which is the national regulations for pesticides. So the way that it works is that pesticide regulations can't be less stringent than FIFRA, but on the individual state level, the states can make it more strict or more in line with the federal regulations. So the way that it kind of works, like for California, is from the national level, from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, we get the baseline regulations, kind of like how there's a federal minimum wage, there's a federal, pesticide regulations. And then California has the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, or CalDPR. And then they're the ones that kind of hone in on all the ag regulations and kind of take that to the state legislature, et cetera. And then on the county level, there can be even more stringent regulations through what's called permit conditions. So in order to apply pesticides in California, you need to have a pesticide permit through the county, which you get through the Ag Commissioner's office. And then they're the ones that do, regulation, enforcement, and inspections. So that's kind of the trajectory of how the laws and regs work in California. And I believe that Illinois, for example, is moving more towards more stringent policies around ag pesticide use.
So as an agricultural business consultant, your job is really to guide farmers to be compliant. Is that correct?
Yep. I say that compliance is the number one thing that I want to provide to my growers or my applicators, just to really make sure that they're understanding the laws and regs. Because if you've ever seen the DPR regulations, it's in Title III of the California Code of Regulations. And it's just very wordy and heady, and it's so hard and difficult to understand. Even when I worked at the county, where I worked for a couple years, like we as inspectors would have a hard time. Like we would argue with each other about what they mean. So my job now as a consultant is to give my perception and my understanding of the laws and regs so that they can best comply with them.
Mm.
So that's really just the main thing, is breaking down those concepts into easier to understand bites and say, hey, this will cover this regulation. It sounds terrible, but really all it is a piece of paper that's displayed. And this is how you would want to display.
Right. So do people consult with you so that they're ready to be audited? And does it happen on a yearly basis, or is it only for farmers that are just starting their practice?
Yeah, so it varies county by county. In the county that I was in, they were a very ag dominated county, where it's millions and millions of dollars. I mean, that's pretty standard across California. But the way that it would work there is they aimed for yearly inspections for the headquarters, for the most part. So there's a few different types of inspections. They're typically done to check records. So there's an inspection called a 109, which is headquarters records inspection. And that's basically saying, hey, do you have this document displayed? Do you have this safety information? Are you training your employees properly? Are you reporting your pesticides? Are you storing them correctly? Is that storage labeled properly? So that's something that they would try to do as close to yearly as possible. But when you have hundreds of permittees, it's a little bit more difficult to hit every single one every year. And then the county that I'm in now, San Mateo, the ag commissioner's office said that they try to aim for yearly inspections there. So it varies county by county depending on workforce and how many permittees there are. I will say that if there is an issue or the ag commissioner does a random pesticide application inspection, they see one of your employees out there applying, and they find something wrong or there's an issue, they would usually trigger a series of inspections just to say, hey, there's something wrong in the field. Let's just make sure that you're good everywhere else. Their goal really is to make sure that we're staying compliant and safe when we're out dealing with the chemicals.
Oh, I see. So it's more for the people applying the chemicals, not so much about how much they apply towards the crops.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. So the safety inspections they're called a 104, an application inspection. What we're checking, or what I was checking at the time, and what I'm checking for now as a compliance consultant. I just want to be clear, I'm not an inspector, so their word is a little bit above mine. But really, it's just making sure, one, if you're an employee, do you have the required personal protective equipment? Your goggles, your gloves, your vest, your boots, your socks, everything like that. And then there is checking the actual labels of the pesticides that are being applied. So what I would do when I worked at the county was, hey, my name's Ranger. I'm with the county. We're going to do a quick safety inspection. I felt that when I said safety inspection, it just kind of made them feel a little bit more at ease. Like, okay, they're here to make sure I'm okay, which is true. But I would also check things like, how much pesticide are you actually using? Are you going at the proper rate per acre? And that's in the actual label. So I would read through the label, make sure they have all the right protective equipment, making sure that they are not applying near any sensitive sites. So things like schools, waterways, or anywhere where there may be endangered species in the area. And if they are they following the additional laws and regulations that would apply in that case? Really, the big thing when it comes to the safety inspections and compliance on the pesticide side is protecting people, the environment, and animals. The applicator themselves, their neighbors, kids at the schools, the people driving by, animals that are running by, and then, of course, making sure that there's no off-site movement of the pesticides. So it really is a holistic approach in this inspection that is done.
I understand. So, I went to a graduation party recently and I met an avocado farmer from California. And I was fascinated because this is totally not my world. I work in high tech, so when I deal with agriculture, it's technology applied to crops. So it was fascinating to learn about the process from farm to table, really. And so I wanted to know everything about the process, and I learned that avocados are picked when they're considered mature, but then, of course, not ripened. This makes sense because from a transportation standpoint, it would be hard to transport soft avocados, right? They'd be bruised and it would be a mess. Anyhow, so, um, I guess there are details about washing and drying and refrigeration and temperature, air control. And then, but when the avocados arrive at the distribution center or at the retailer's site, they sit in a ripening room before they hit the shelf. And in this ripening room, there's a gas, and I don't remember how to pronounce it. Is it ethylene gas?
Ethylene, yeah.
Ethylene gas is introduced under controlled conditions to promote uniform ripening. So I looked up ethylene gas in the National Library of Medicine. And recently, actually back in November 2023, the Brazilian Journal of Nephrology published a paper that talked about substance used in the ripening of fruit that can cause kidney damage and water and electrolytic disorders. So just so the audience knows, water and electrolytic disorders are essentially imbalances in the body's fluid and electrolyte levels, which are essential for nerve and muscle function and overall bodily processes. So these imbalances, by the way, can severely harm humans and disrupt essential bodily functions, leading to various symptoms and potentially life-threatening complications. So imbalances can also cause organ dysfunction, impaired muscle and nerve function, and even cardiac arrest if left untreated. Wow. So, and you mentioned too that, there are regulations, you don't want to spray next to school, you don't want to spray next to endangered species. So, I suppose pesticides are not all that great for our health. What's your take on that?
I mean, when you really break it down, a lot of it is supply and demand and how do we feed the world. And I think it's such an interesting thing because I'm not going to sit here and say pesticides are good for you. They're not. Like they're a poison. That's what they have to be in order to kill the organisms, whether it's a insecticide, herbicide, miticide, algicide, whatever kind of pest you're trying to control, or in this case, promote the ripening process. Like there is inherent risks with using it. And when it comes specifically to like in your case of that post-harvest treatment, like they're not necessarily trying to get rid of a bug or get rid of a insect or fungus or anything for the most part. But there are other treatments like with walnuts or almonds that they treat them post-harvest to ensure there's no other, call them hitchhikers before they get shipped off to other countries or even other counties within California. And I was really thinking about this question because I saw that it was in the email that you'd sent. And I think a lot of it really does just stem down to supply and demand. Like I said a moment ago, if we want things like bananas or avocados or strawberries year round, as of right now, these are the processes that we have in place in order to get them to the world, right? To get them from California all the way to New York or Nebraska or Arkansas. So it's kind of like that. If there is this required evil that we have to do, how can we do it in the safest way possible? So my concern, of course, is on the consumer side. I mean, if people are putting these things into their bodies, is it safe? Is it being tested at the university level in these research labs? But also, are the people that are applying the pesticides in those controlled situations, are they properly trained? Are they doing everything they can to protect themselves, their coworkers, and, the end consumer? Because they're the ones that are going to be exposed to that very highly concentrated material. And theoretically, hopefully, that they do everything correctly, it will have dissipated by the time it gets to the end user. So it's really just making sure that at all levels, the laws, regulations, and training are done properly to provide a safe product for our guacamole dip and our avocado toast here in San Francisco area.
Right. And to your point, so mind you, 90% of bananas actually also go through this artificial ripening process. But how can we balance agricultural practices while being mindful of health consequences?
It's really understanding not just how to follow the laws, but why they are in place. Again, going back to the ag producer side, something that I do tell my clients and the people that I consult with is these laws and regulations, whether it's OSHA or food and health or pesticide use, these laws and regs are written in blood. There is a reason why they exist. Everything from don't keep, when you're cleaning your house, don't put bleach into food containers. That is specifically set on the label. Every label that is in the United States is law on the federal level. So it is a violation to go against it. So I think when it comes to actually balancing the end user and the pesticide use in the field, I think a lot of it does stem down to the end user understanding if they want these products, what does it actually have to go through to get to them?
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost kind of like a decision that has to be made in the grocery store, which, you know, I'm saying how to control the behavior of millions and millions and millions of people. But if you really don't want these products that are treated with those chemicals, don't buy them.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're going to be created in that way, or you would have to pay a higher premium in order for them to be treated with more, how do you say, like naturally occurring means, or you just have to wait till they're in season or live in an area where you can actually get them fresh from the farm stands.
Yeah, and even then, I bet you there are pesticides. I mean, so I grew up in France and spent a few years in Indonesia when my parents were expats working there. I remember as a kid, different fruits and vegetables were available in different seasons, right? And today, like you mentioned earlier, you can find watermelon year-round. One could say consumer demand drives agricultural practices to satisfy commercial objectives. But at the same time, I think, I live in Colorado. So if I only were to rely on the seasonality of fruits and vegetables in the winter, unless I would freeze or can or have a greenhouse, I wouldn't have any to eat because nothing grows here in the winter. It's so cold.
Exactly.
So it's a balance, like you said. But even with organic fruits and vegetables, I think there are certain degrees of pesticides, correct?
Yeah, so there are pesticides that are allowed in the organic production of fruits and veggies. So when they say organic, don't get that confused with pesticide free, right? Because anything is considered a pesticide that is used to control a pest. Anything from the big R word of Roundup, all the way down to even snail baits. Like those are still used in an agricultural setting. So if it says organic, that doesn't necessarily mean pesticide free, because there are certain pesticides that are allowed in that production as well. So you're correct.
Yeah. And same with fertilizer, right? I mean, you deal with regulations around fertilizers as well?
Not so much, but there are very similar practices to be held. Like they also have certain PPE that you need to wear. They need to be applied in a certain way. And just like with pesticides, applying too little or too much causes issues on either end. Chemical burns or not actually getting the nutrients you need, wasted time, labor, energy, wasted products. So very, very similar, but they're regulated differently. I'm more so on that pesticide portion of it.
I'm going to throw you off and say something. I just watched a reel on Instagram, and it was a village in France where people, the villagers would drop off their urine in big gallon jugs for this farmer to utilize as fertilizers.
Yeah.
Have you heard of such practice before?
Not on a scale like that. But I mean, people use manure for fertilizer. They have to process it a certain way in the US to make sure that it's not like that green waste in a way. Well, maybe green waste isn't the right word, but that it's processed properly so there's no disease or anything else that could be transmitted. So I feel like I have a whole rabbit hole to go down now tonight, just based off of that. I got to find that TikTok.
Right. Actually, it's an Instagram reel. I'll send it to you. It was fascinating. So what drives agricultural regulations?
Yeah, I would say, like I said earlier, it's almost kind of vulgar. It's very provocative in a way, but I would say that every regulation is written in blood. There is a reason that we have to have the SDS, the safety data sheets and the label near the use site at all times. There's a reason why we have to wear certain protective equipment. There's a reason why at the end of the day, and usually it's because somebody was hurt, injured, or even killed. I know that there are, even because when it comes to pesticide regulation, I also want to back up and say that there's even regulations for the pesticides that you have in your house. Like your ant spray, that is considered a pesticide. Bleach, Clorox, if it has an EPA number, if you go and look at the label, it should say EPA reg number and then, a whole bunch of numbers. That's a pesticide, and that needs to be legally used in accordance with its label, because there's been accidents or incidents. There was one case I remember where I had to do a whole investigation where, grandma was cleaning the house and she ended up putting a little bit of bleach into a cup, and that's what she was using to clean. And, little Timmy runs over and took a sip of it. He was totally okay, but he did end up going to the emergency room. And that is a big thing that we talk about on the ag side is do not put these chemicals in anything remotely similar to a food or beverage container. There's people that I wrote someone up for this also, but they used a halved Coke can to try to measure the pesticide. And it's like, you can't do that. That's not accurate. That goes against the accurate measurement regulation that there is. It goes against the label. You can't do that. And it's using a food container. And that's because people have done that in the past. And little Timmy, it's always little Timmy, runs over, finds it at the use site and tries to drink it because it looks like Coca-Cola or Mountain Dew. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying, unfortunately, these laws and regulations are here because something else went terribly wrong at another point in time. But thankfully, because of those regulations, it's preventing it from happening all over.
So what would you say is the most failed process in an audit?
So the most failed or the most common violation in one of these audits is what's called misuse of pesticide against its registered labeling and permit conditions. So what that means is basically the pesticide is not being used in accordance with its label. And the reason, that sounds pretty bad. Like, how are so many people not using it properly? Most violations do trigger that violation. That's kind of like the mothership violation. So for example, if I were to roll up and do a inspection on someone, let's say I'm doing a faux audit right now in my consulting practice, and the applicator is wearing the wrong type of gloves, technically that's a PPE violation as well as a label violation. If they are applying, if it's a pesticide that's toxic to bees, and they are applying at a certain time during the day, then that would technically be a label violation as well as a pollinator protection violation. So that's kind of like the catch on all of these violations is you're not using it in accordance with the label. Then it kind of does go down to, again, proper personal protective equipment, emergency medical care plan. That's one of those where it's like, it's just a piece of paper. And that's kind of one of the things that growers sometimes have a hard time with is it's like that one little thing I missed. And that was a pretty common one, was the emergency medical response, where they have a binder and they have the plan. Like, let's say something goes wrong, a nozzle explodes and someone gets pesticides on their face and in their eyes. The grower and the property owner, the employer, has a responsibility to ensure that medical response is thought of. And, there's an SOP, a standard operating procedure in place to say, if this happens, this place needs to be called, then me, then this, then this, then this, to make sure that in that panic, you're not wasting time. And one of those requirements is to make sure that the nearest hospital that can take care of pesticide related incidents is displayed. And that's one that's kind of missed because it needs to be displayed kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen like in a supermarket, like when you're going to the bathrooms, there's like that big cork board that says, know your rights as an employee. This is the federal minimum wage. You've seen that. Growers need to have something like that also. And, they usually have all of that. I call it the board nobody reads. because like you just have to put it out there, but like who's going to sit there on their lunch break and actually look at that?
Mm-hmm.
But that is one of those pieces of paper that need to be there that says, in the case of an emergency, this is the direct line to the hospital.
Mm.
Sometimes people will put 911, but it needs to be directly to that hospital to warn them of what has happened and say, this is the pesticide that was used. And that's why you need to have the labels and the safety data sheets nearby, because theoretically you want to grab those with you when they go to the hospital and say, this is exactly what they were hit with. Because if you just say, oh, we were applying insecticide or herbicide, it's like, which one? Because they're all treated differently. And there is that exposure risk for the medical professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those things where it's like, it's just a piece of paper, but that is going to save seconds when the worst happens. And then there's more I can go off of and list. I have my whole little list over here. But a lot of it is, what is it? Or they're like the barely just missed it kind of violations that happen.
So they don't do any drills before the inspection. They don't practice, scenarios to be well versed in the process.
So if for growers, let's say that they have employees, those employees do need to be trained on an annual basis in the state of California. So they need to be trained every single year about pesticide safety, identifying, is this pesticide related or is this heat illness? Because they kind of correspond and they're very similar, but you want to make sure you're treating the right ailment and you're getting to the correct cause of the issue.
Yeah.
So they do kind of have those scenarios where they walk over, hey, like, this is why we have to have a closed mixing system with danger pesticides, because they are corrosive to the skin. It could be fatal if swallowed. You want to make sure that you're using proper techniques, because this is what could happen. And that's why, again, they want to have those medical response planned in advance, so that, again, when incidents do end up happening, you have that answer. So it's like they're not necessarily running through like a fire drill per se, but per regulation, they do need to have some kind of plan in place and communicate that, with the managers or the foreman or the site supervisor, and then disperse that down to the field workers and the applicators.
Like some type of rehearsal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you advise the ag industry as a whole for them to keep up with the changing regulatory compliances?
I would say that as a whole, it really does stem down to go to effective continuing education unit courses. In the state of California, we have, again, varying levels of licenses, all the way up from, pest control advisor to qualified applicator to private applicator. And each of those levels do require continuing education units. And, when you have to renew your license in order to pass and go to these classes to do so, sometimes you kind of just get whatever you can and just kind of sit there and hope you get your hours and then head out. But I would really advise that growers do take that seriously. Not to say that they don't per se, but to say that make the most of that time. Go to courses that are actual real updates in the industry. Go to your university extension. Go to your ag commissioner. Ask the questions so that you understand not just what the regulations are, but why they're in place and how you can best stay in compliance. So again, education.
Oh, that totally makes sense. And are there any required number of credits or units they have to be up to date on a yearly basis, or how does it work?
Yeah, so it depends on the license, and I don't have all of them memorized, but I believe that for the pest control advisor level, that one is the most. And the reason for that one, and that has to be renewed every 2 years. And the reason that one is the most, I want to say it's 24 hours per year. I may be mistaken on that. But I mean, that's a pretty significant amount of time to sit in class. But that's because they're the ones making the recommendations. So the growers typically work with a pest control advisor to say, this is my crop. Can you go out there, see what kind of, pests, whether it's bugs, weeds, et cetera, I'm dealing with? And then you tell me what I am to buy. I will buy it, and then I'll go apply it. And since they're the ones that are doing that and making the recommendations, they're kind of like the field doctors saying, this is the disease, this is the treatment. they have to have the highest level of education. And it does require a college degree or a certain amount of experience in order to even get to the pest control advisor level.
Mm.
And then it does go down to, a qualified applicator, a qualified applicator license, and then a qualified applicator certificate. And that's more so on the pest control business side. Like they're the ones that are going out there and being hired to apply pesticides. And then on that, I don't want to say the lowest level, but it requires the lowest level of continuing education units. And this one is through the county. The others were through the state, is the private applicator certificate. And that is what qualifies growers and their employees in some cases to apply restricted use materials to their property, which are like the higher level danger pesticides like paraquat, 2,4-D, et cetera, where there's a higher risk, a higher toxicity of those materials. And that one requires, 6 hours of education over a 3-year period. So much lower, but they're the ones that are out there doing that work.
Yeah. Okay, that totally makes sense to me. So I'm going to ask you a hard question.
All right, I'm ready.
So in your line of work, what do you think is the biggest gap in farming practices vis-a-vis new health research?
I would say that it's just the speed of research and education. I know that, and I'm going to speak a little bit more in generalities because, research takes a long time to happen, whether it's at, like my alma mater, UC Davis, or any other institution. Like it takes a lot of time to say definitively, this causes that. And what I have seen is the people at the research level, they understand it on such a high level that they do have a difficult time breaking it down into more applicable terms. Like even when I did a research project in school about the benefits of no-till farming on the soil. And for me, it was like, yeah, this makes total sense.
Yeah.
Why would you ever till? Like,
Right.
Don't disturb the soil. You get higher organic material and you get this and you get that. And then when I started actually working on farms and getting in like my feet in the dirt, my hands covered in soil, I really understood like that's not feasible for a lot of people. Like, yes, you are correct that in these controlled lab environments, that is true. And we do our best to follow it. But what is shown in the lab isn't always practical in the field. And I think that that's a really big key is that researchers and those and the university level do need to work with the actual growers, and the growers do have that responsibility to work with those researchers to really find the best way for us to move sustainably forward. I feel like in the ag industry or even a lot of other industries, it's, people kind of point fingers and say, you're the problem or you're this or you're that, whether it's the legislation at the state level or federal level, like they're the problem. And then they point at the growers and say, no, you're the problem. And then the researchers, the consultants kind of get thrown on, right? And I think it's a lot less about pointing the finger of blame and more so about shaking hands and finding areas to cooperate. So I would say that that's really the biggest issue is understanding and communicating across all the different stakeholders in that chain, that supply chain for the ag industry.
I love
hope
it.
that answers your question.
I love it. I think that would be ideal, right? And do you see that happening? Obviously not, because you identified that as the biggest gap. So there needs to be more collaboration.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that what the university does with the university extension and the cooperative extension, that is a huge help. What they're able to do is take, everything at that university level, and they are making more materials like even years and years ago that are useful for growers, whether it's pest ID books, new research, new CEUs. It's just one of those things where it's like I feel like that is one of the biggest issues, but that's also one of the biggest areas that there are so many leaps and bounds in.
Yeah.
And then I do think it's important for people kind of like me that have experience on the enforcement side to take that experience and be of service to the growers. Because I have my background in ag. Like I grew up working on ranches and doing 4-H and FFA. So like I understand the lingo. I was on the academic side at UC Davis. So I understand the research and how those practices come into play. And on the enforcement side of how these laws and regs are actually written and what they mean. So I think it's like people kind of like in my space, like we have that, like it's so hard to say we have that responsibility. I think it's like the Spider-Man mentality, right? Like with great power comes great responsibility. Like to find ways for all of us to work in tandem. And remember, like no one is the bad guy here
Yeah.
because we're trying to feed the world, feed our families at the same time and make sure we're doing it properly.
Right. So the piece of advice is wash your fruits really well, fruits and vegetables really well.
Yes.
Before consuming them, right?
Yes. And remember that so on that side, like there are things like a pre-harvest interval. There's already regulations in place to make sure they're not spraying it right before it goes out. There needs to be a certain amount of time between application and harvest. So yes, like,
okay.
Wash them because there's still going to be dirt and other things on them probably. But like there are regulations in place to protect us as consumers as much as possible.
I love it. Well, Ranger, I've been enlightened. I learned so much from this podcast, so I can't thank you enough for educating me and educating the audience about this business. And do you have any closing remarks before we say goodbye?
No, I would really say that the only thing is to meet your local farmer. Over here on the coast side in Half Moon Bay, we do something every year called Farm Fish and Flowers, which is a great opportunity for people to get out there, go meet the fishermen, go meet the farmers, go meet the producers that are in your local area within a 10, 15-mile radius. And I think that if we had more opportunities like that, like You Pick Farms or anything else, really educate yourself, not just by going on Google or watching the documentaries, but by shaking hands with the people that are actually shake hands with the people whose hands are in the dirt.
Yeah.
I would say that that's probably one of the biggest pieces that I would love the listeners to take away from this.
Wow. I think it's a brilliant idea. So I'm even going to look that up because I love...
Fly on out. It's at the end of July.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I even asked that avocado farmer, can I do an internship at your farm? Because I just wanted to see the whole process. But thank you so much, Ranger. You're just amazing. And if people want to learn more about you, is there a website they can go to?
I would say that the 3 best places to find me are on social media, the internet, and my own podcast. So on social media, my handle is @withinrange_coaching. You can see more about my pesticide compliance consulting as well as my walk across the U.S. Throwing that out there at the last second.
I love
it. My website is withinrangecoaching.com. And then my podcast is the Never Peak Project, which is on Apple, Spotify, etc. So again, thank you, Jackie, for your time and for letting me speak with your audience and nerd out about pesticide regulation for a little bit.
I love it. So, and it's related to health. So, again, thank you. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to collaborate on another topic in the future.
Of course. If listeners want to submit questions to you and then we talk about that, that could be pretty fun.
All right. Thanks. Take care. Bye, Ranger. And bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.